The Special School District of St. Louis County Board of Education and April work study is now called to order. Will all who are able, please rise for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I now ask for a roll call vote for the establishment report.
Director Asner. Here. President Staton.
Here.
Vice President Cunha.
Here.
Director Suda.
Here.
Director Sartorius.
Here.
Director Beaver.
Here. A quorum being present, welcome to our work study. Now proceed with tonight's agenda.
Thank you, President Carmen. Tonight, we will delve into SSD's 10-year facility plan. Chief of Technical Education and Operations, Kevin Andrew, will present us with the comprehensive plan. Turn it over to Kevin.
All right. Good evening, Board of Directors, President Staton, Vice President Cuneo. I'm Kevin Andrew, Chief of Career and Technical Education Operations for Special School District. Presenting with me this evening, Jeff Sherrill, our Director of Facilities. We also have representation from BLDD, which is our architecture firm. So we have Damian Schild, Laura Wunderlich, and Nelson Musoka. And so this presentation, we're going to be going through a lot of different information, and we'll have a couple spots where we'll have some breaks where we get some movement involved as well. So if you can't see the charts from where you're seated, that's not the intention. We'll get up and we'll look at some charts and graphs here in a little bit so you can get a lay of the land. So that's going to kind of be our flow for this evening. So overview, we're going to start with talking about our history and scope. Then we're going to talk about the priorities of the 10-year facility plan that we're working through. We're going to talk about the process that we use to develop the plan. Then we're going to dig into the findings. Then we're going to talk about our proposed 10-year plan. We're going to go through and look kind of at that year by year. And at the end, we're going to talk about what next steps look like for the plan. So starting with history and scope. So when you look at Special School District of St. Louis County, too far, we have buildings that serve a variety of purposes. We have K-8 schools, we have a K-12 school, we have high schools. And if you look at the ages of those buildings, we kind of see two different groupings. We have a chunk of buildings that were built in the 1960s and 70s. And then we have a handful of buildings that are newer, 2000 onward. And so as you look through the plan, you really see two different groupings of what the needs are of those buildings because of the varying ages we see across the district. We also think it's important to point out that when we talk about the districts that are a part of our 10-year facility plan, that scope is listed in the schools that are listed on the slide. We're not looking at any facilities that are located in partner districts. We are only looking at the facilities that are owned or leased by Special School District of St. Louis County. So looking at the previous 10 years. So we had a 10-year plan that came shortly after we had a tax levy increase in 2012. That was Proposition S. The plan was a set plan, so it wasn't a rolling plan. We didn't add years as we went. It started and it ended. The plan was very fluid. There were a lot of frequent additions and subtractions as we navigated through that plan that rose out of Proposition S. Because at that time we were asking for additional funding from the taxpayers of St. Louis County, the plan included a pretty diverse group of projects, and it was a lot of fairly large capital improvement projects. So you see there listed some of the major projects that were a part of that. So school entries and main offices, that was for safety and security purposes. So all of our schools got that facelift at the front to have a safe vestibule entry. We did HVAC upgrades pretty early in the plan in all of our locations across the district. We also had a new Northview High School that was a part of that project, as well as Central Bus Garage, Audiology, and the Learning Center building. Then we added new wings in a number of our schools. We also relocated the Bridges program to its own dedicated space. We did a number of CTE shop remodels, playgrounds in a variety of locations, and a lot of other safety and security measures, especially things like cameras and other equipment that allowed us to monitor our spaces while they're not occupied. So all of that was a part of the previous plan.
Hi, everyone. The takeaways and lessons learned, the project amounts and capital spending has varied greatly from year to year. Some schools received more focus and a greater focus was placed on new construction over preventive maintenance and infrastructure needs. We've seen a lack of strategic planning for parking lots, loading docks, and side entries. Part of that.
So now we're talking about kind of the priorities as we look at building a new 10-year facility plan for the district. So first thing, I think it's important to note that students must Maslow before they can bloom. If we don't have those foundational pieces of safety, feel like I'm in a safe, welcoming environment, the students are not going to be able to engage in the instructional strategies that our teachers are trying to do every day in the classroom. And so that's really where we wanted to center when we look at this plan. So we have identified 8 priorities that are really our guiding principles for the plan, and we have these somewhat in rank order. So first and foremost is that our spaces are safe, warm and cool or dry. If we don't have those things needed, those needs met, then we're really not able to teach in those spaces. Second piece is compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. We are the special school district of St. Louis County, and so it's important to us that all of our spaces are accessible to our students in the community that we serve. Then third is that we're focusing on spaces that are utilized by students, and that's something you're going to kind of see throughout what we present this evening is our heavy focus on student-facing buildings. Our fourth piece is having a proactive plan to avoid potentially disruptive or costly emergency outages. It's much cheaper to plan to replace a water main than it is to replace a water main after it has broken. And now it's an emergency repair. So now we're doing things after hours, on weekends, as well as potentially cleaning up damage from that breakage, where if we knew that we're reaching end of life and we can proactively replace that, we can prevent a higher cost for the exact same project. Fifth piece is we want to have predictable and consistent fiscal impact. So as Jeff mentioned, we had years where we were spending a large amount on capital projects, then that went down to a smaller amount, and it was really yo-yoing from year to year. There wasn't a predictability of what we're doing. And so we see as a priority getting to where we have a consistent level that we're spending year over year when we're looking at capital project improvements. Sixth piece is being future ready, recognizing that these schools are going to have to not just meet the needs of learners right now, but the needs of learners in the future. So making sure our spaces are flexible and able to adapt to what future needs might arise in those spaces. What we might be doing in a classroom today might look very different 10 years from now, and making sure we position ourselves to be able to navigate that change. Our seventh one is that the plan can be implemented with existing resources. And this is a big one with us, is making sure with our existing staffing resources, the fiscal resources that we have a plan that we believe we can implement with the tools that we have at our disposal right now. So none of this plan involves adding additional staff or any of those types of resources to execute or implement the plan. And then last, was we want to move this to being a rolling plan. So year over year, it's a 10-year plan where we continue to add an additional year on as we navigate through. So we are always looking 10 years into the future of what are the needs of our facilities. So that way we know where we are going. And that way the board is always in the loop of what's up next for the next 10 years. On the right there, you had the picture of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we thought that was a good comparison of a lot of what we have as our priorities are mirroring a lot of what you're going to see within Maslow. So this is our first feedback point for the board. So we gave you what the 8 different priorities are that we have. Questions that we have for you is, do you have any questions about priorities that are on the list? Is there anything that you think is on the list that needs to move up or down on the list from the board's perspective? Or are there any additional priorities that you think we should consider as we think about the cascading 10-year plan?
I'm just curious, why 10?
Why a 10-year plan?
Yeah, wow, why a 10-year plan versus a 3-year?
Well, you're gonna see later this evening that we kind of cheated and we sort of made a 20-year plan. Because as we navigated through buildings, we found things that it's like, we need to remember that. And so as you collect that data, so we're gonna share with you tonight a plan that goes loosely out to 2042. We recognize that as you go out that far, it's hard to predict what things are going to cost and inflation and those types of things. I'm hoping I'm still here in 2042. I don't know if other folks in the room will. But when we get that far out, we're really looking at what are those things that we need to know on the horizon, like how we mentioned the HVAC work that was done. We know there's a certain lifespan for the HVAC work. So knowing that, we don't want to have to do all those projects at the same time. So if all that's going to be kind of hitting end of life about the same time. How do we build in
Yeah,
a
we're
cycle?
And try to stage those in towards the, the 10 through 15 year range or 15 through 20 year range.
And
Because we
so,
did a lot of those at the same time, the last 10 years.
yeah, so we stuck with a 10-year plan because we're really confident about kind of where we're going in the next decade or so. We feel pretty good about our ability to predict what the needs are in the facilities. As you get farther out from that, it's a little bit less solid. There's a little bit more fluidity there of when projects could take place. And that's why we went with the 10-year plan.
Yeah, thank you. My question isn't related to this page, but it is related to something you've covered. Do you need to hold that or?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I don't have current slide numbers, but on the SSD schools facilities, I know we are leasing our warehouse. Is that one of these buildings? That's
So
listed
that is the
here?
distribution center that's
Distribution
under
center.
other facilities.
Okay,
So it lives by multiple names, but yeah, distribution center is also referred to as the warehouse. And we will talk about that a little bit more later this evening as well. Yeah.
thank you.
Anything else on priorities?
Those are-
All right, we will keep it moving. All right, so now we're going to talk about the process that we use to develop the plan. So there were really three legs of the stool that were used to develop our 10-year facility plan. So the first piece of the puzzle that Jeff's going to talk about here in a little bit is our functional assessment. The functional needs assessment is really determining how well do our schools operate as schools? How are we meeting the needs of the learner? The second piece was our physical needs assessment. So that was the deep look under the hood, looking at everything between the walls as well as outside of the walls that impacts our buildings and spaces, and identifying all of the pieces and facilities that we might need to worry about when we think about infrastructure. So that was completed with our architecture firm, our facilities department, technology services. We also had FSG, which is our engineering consultants as well, that did those physical needs assessments with us, as well as some specialty groups like RTM, who helped us with the roofing analysis. Then the last piece was requests and needs. So we have a lot of institutional knowledge of things that have been coming up from our schools where they've identified recurring problems or challenges. Also within the facilities department, Jeff has a good handle on what are those things that we keep having to repair that are really in the neighborhood of now it might be time to replace? Or what are those things that continue to require additional service calls or after-hour service calls that we want to make sure that we are getting out ahead of? And so we factored that into the plan as well. So those three data pieces were what we used as our North Star as we developed the 10-year cascading.
Next, you will see our overview of finding. This is the functional needs assessment. For our functional needs assessment portion, we assisted the capacity of our current SSD facilities to see if they meet the present and future educational needs. We utilized a 96-question survey completed by district administration, building principals, and the district architects. Topics that we reviewed are in the 6 key domains that you see here. Site is considered your outside and landscaping. Building systems is like your heating, air conditioning, roofs. Maintainability is how easy it is to keep the school in good working order with materials, quality of products. Safety and security is just like it sounds. Program support is, does the building lay out in a properly for the support? And then educational environment, is the building welcoming, conducive for learning? The next slide.
I have a question.
Yes.
The difference between program support and educational environment. So program support is specifically like, I guess I don't
I
necessarily.
can speak to that.
I didn't
Yeah.
hear the difference.
Yeah, so program support are they the right spaces? Are they the right size? Are they functioning in the way to support the programs that want to be delivered? Environment was actually one of the comments that Kevin made about, does it feel like a school? Does it feel
Okay.
welcoming? So that's the separation.
Okay.
Physical.
Yeah, there
space
might
to
be like
support.
lighting,
Yeah,
paint on the
good
walls.
lighting,
or-
nice, bright,
Yeah,
daylight, those
Thank
are
you.
the environment versus program support is, do you have the right size of rooms for these labs?
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, David. Absolutely.
This is a snippet of a 96-question survey. Each question is graded on a scale from A to F. The scores were developed in a meeting with the building principals, facilities, and architects. Further in the presentation, you have an opportunity to see the results from each site.
And one thing that was nice about the functional needs assessment activity is we had the principals from all the different schools in the same space at the same time, so they could kind of calibrate against each other. So if one building said, well, I think I'm a B, and another building knows, well, you know what, in my building, it's a lot nicer than what it is over there. If that's a B, then I'm probably in an A range, or vice versa. Well, so we really helped us crack down on potential grade inflation and making sure that we were being honest about our spaces. So we had a good glimpse and they were able to kind of lean on each other to figure out, well, how does this look in your space and what might be needs here? So there were, especially the beginning of the survey, there was a lot of back and forth as they were trying to calibrate around what's an A, what's a B, what's a C. By the time we got to the end, we were pretty quick.
And I think something that should be stated with that is a comparison of your buildings. This isn't like we take the grades from SSD and then go compare them. It's about how they're working for your programs. So that dialogue as a group is really important, as opposed to just us as architects saying, here's your grade. It doesn't matter if they compare to another district, so.
Functional needs assessment scoring looks like this: 90 or above meets today's needs. 70 to 90 meets most of today's needs, and anything lower could require major investment.
So then in addition to the functional needs assessment, we also did the physical needs assessment. So this was completed through detailed walkthroughs of every single building in the district, both student facing and non-student facing buildings. The results are organized into two categories. And so the first category you have is priority, and that's how urgent is it that we get this work done? Is it something that needs to be right away, or is it something that can be done a little bit later down the road? The other way that this information was categorized was by category. What's the type of work that we're doing? The results include a detailed list of all the findings broken down by building. And so when we talk about the priorities, so it's A through D. Priority A is urgent. These are things that need to be addressed in the next 0 to 1 years. So things that need to be done right away because either it's not functioning or there might be a safety hazard that's a part of it. So something that we really need to get out in front of. Priority B is something that's necessary to be done pretty quickly, but there's a little bit of leeway. So those are projects that need to be done in the next 2 to 5 years. That would be a priority B project. Priority C is recommended. Those are things that, again, we need to get this done, but we have a longer time frame to address the issue. That's a 6 to 10 year time frame, was anything that was in the priority C. Then priority D, these are improvements. So these are things that don't have to be done right now. They can be done in the next 10 plus years. But there's a couple pieces with priority D. Some of these are things that might be ways to improve the educational environment that even though it's not necessary to do it right now, and we talk about the best interest of students, it might be something that's worth doing sooner, even though it wasn't necessarily urgent based on those other criteria that we were looking at. So we thought it was really important in this activity to capture all those priority Ds, especially if there's a year where we might come in under budget and we have additional funds where we might be able to do something sooner or potentially do one of those improvement projects because there's additional revenue in a given year.
Grant.
Yeah, grants are one of those things that especially could be an option for priority D projects. And then the categories. And so there are 4 categories. So site, that's physical need items outside the facility. So that's fencing, that's paving, that's parking lots, all of those pieces, all the walkways that we've added, handrails, those types of things. Architectural, that's all the items in the facility directly related, that are not related to plumbing, electrical. So those are things like roofs, windows, doorways, all of those pieces that are part of the building. A lot of our ADA accessibility pieces fall in the category of architectural. Mechanical, electrical, plumbing, like it sounds, it's anything that's mechanical, electrical, plumbing. That also includes our fire protection, fire suppression systems, as well as our technology systems that are throughout the buildings. And then soft costs. So these are costs that might be related to architectural design or engineering, but the bigger piece of this puzzle is contingency for these projects. A lot of projects that we have listed, the cost has a little bit of fluidity because you really don't know until you start going into a wall what might be behind that wall, or what we might find underneath concrete. And so the contingency costs are built in there, knowing that things might happen along the way, that a project might seem like it's this big and might become a little bit bigger as we get further in line. And that's because of the age of our buildings. When you're dealing with buildings that were built in the sixties and seventies, there are things that were okay in the sixties that are not okay in 2025. That we would want to address while we're digging into those projects.
We find a lot of asbestos when we open up the walls, yeah.
What about lead paint? I thought, I was thinking lead paint and asbestos.
We don't run across a lot of lead paint anymore. Most of ours have been completely painted. So, but yeah, when we open walls up, there's a lot of asbestos pipe wrap, all that we run into, so we have to build that into the projects. Or at least knowing that it could be there.
So what you have here is just a snippet. This is for Ackerman School of the detailed physical needs assessment findings. So really small sample size. Ackerman had about 324 lines of findings throughout the building. So as things were found, they were just added to the list. So we captured all of the individual things for each building. And you kind of have a detailed comment about what it is, a rough idea of the cost, and some details that are associated with it. So that level of report was created for every single building that we have in the district.
And just to speak to why this is the pathway for that is, this gives an understanding of kind of all those needs. Some districts decide to go back and update their finishes. This would allow that to be categorized in that nature. This then was the backbone as we started to say, okay, we need to update a set of restrooms. We had all the pieces that made that to create $1 to that from this. It was just how then it was packaged to become a project, if you will. But just like the idea of a 10-year plan versus a 3-year plan, this outlined all those things just over the 3 years, just at that 10-year mark, so you could plan. And then as we talked as a group, we could set up a plan that worked for SSD.
And fits our budget
Yes.
for the next 10 years.
All right, we're going to move to a gallery walk here in a moment, but before we make that transition, any questions about those instruments?
Who participated in
The physical needs assessment, yeah, the physical needs assessment. So that was our facilities team, our IT team, our architects, the engineers, and then some specialty groups when we're looking at roofs and those types of things. In some places, building principals join some walks. Yeah,
because they might know this little corner leaks when
Yeah.
it rains.
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, and that
We definitely have a lot of their input from.
Yeah. And they were a big part of the functional needs assessment. And that's why we kind of saw those two data sets kind of feed off of each other.
And some of their needs came out during that, requesting, issues with air conditioning and HVAC, and some exhaust issues, so, we were able to take those notes.
And Nelson was actually on site in several of the buildings, and I remember him having even lists of things that we couldn't see above ceilings of, hey, these are the, there's a leak in this room, or that, this bathroom doesn't work well, that became items, even though we couldn't visually see them, that became items, so that was across the building.
Thank you.
And Jeff really did a great job helping us provide, ladders for us to get up in the ceilings and get in contact with maintenance people who might know what's happening under the carpets and everything like that, so. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to dig into some findings. So we have those up on the poster boards up top. So you've got the functional needs assessments or your 2 bar graphs. Then we have our pie charts, which are the findings from the physical needs assessment. So you've got it by priority and category. Then we've got some initial cost data for you to look at as well, based off the physical needs assessment. So you've got Post-it notes in front of you, kind of 4 prompts of things to think about as you're looking at the charts. Is what are things that you might see as strengths, if any of that jumps off the page? Anything that you might see as a weakness or a vulnerability, something we should be concerned about that you want to call out? Any questions that you might have from the findings of looking at any of the different charts that are up there? And then the last one, I like the bucket of just other insights. Anything else that you saw that might not be a question, but something that you want to make sure that we capture. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to kind of work your way through each of the different charts that's on display. And then have the boards over there for your questions to be added, and then we'll kind of work through that information.
You want us to use Post-its to post our?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Kevin was letting down.
Oh, thanks.
Sorry.
We know the states. They will be, I'll just find that for you. What's based on. So they're not using, I mean, I think they're still. Bathrooms they can use. Never that. Sometimes they're. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I noticed.
I wrote no, so now I've got to sit there and write that.
Yeah. You don't even know it's a big, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. It's nice to loop them into other projects too, so you kind of get out better.
I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. The smaller you have to do, I should pay full burden, the bigger you can make it.
Welcome to the club.
Put it in mind.
For sure.
Use the whole facilities. And if we can also work outside of summer, that's prime time. And we're doing a sidewalk.
Okay.
After doing.
You did also spell. No. I thought you found it spelling out. Yeah.
That's how we already got it.
Yeah.
What is good? So.
Beautiful. Yep. Let's look at it. Yeah.
Give it one more minute, gonna start working through. Any other post-its?
We get
All right, so we'll start kind of working through feedback. And so, especially because we've been looking at this for a long time, so it's getting fresh eyes on this, especially the board's perspective. It's something we wanted to get today. So strengths. So the functional assessment scores are all above satisfactory. That was also one of our takeaways, that our buildings all are, for the most part, meeting today's needs. And we had a couple buildings that even spilled over into that excellent category. So that was something that we really saw as a takeaway. And that's a byproduct of what we've done for the last 10+ years in the facilities plan, where it was really a dedicated focus on entryways and all those things that help drive up those scores in the functional needs assessment. Then the functionings of our buildings are high, and facilities overall seem to be in good condition, but need the regular maintenance, electrical, plumbing, et cetera. So yeah, that was one of those big takeaways from the functional needs assessment. That was what we heard a lot from our building principals as well, is overall, they feel good about their school spaces, but they invited other educators into their schools. Like, I feel proud about showing the space that I'm in. And that was for all of our principals. It's like, we have really nice school spaces that our students are able to walk in every single day and learn. So some weaknesses. So I ended up pulling one over from the questions about it related to this. So weakness and vulnerability about renting a building, was a question mark. And then also, are we planning on, to buy, for the distribution center? So the distribution center is one of our least, it's our only leased space that we have in the district. So we are looking at, as a part of the facilities plan, we did capture what the cost would be if we continue to occupy it. Because as a part of our lease, we are responsible for the HVAC system in the building, as well as some other infrastructure pieces that are nearing end of life. That if we stay in a rented building, we would be on the hook for maintaining and repairing and replacing, or will we look at other options? And so we're currently looking at what other options might be on the table as a relocation of the distribution center. So that's something that is an exploratory component of this plan. Jeff and I were actually looking at a property yesterday to try and see what is out there that might potentially meet our needs in that space.
And I think also, Kevin, to the point of that, and I know Dr. Kuhn is probably going to mention, but as a board, we've discussed that, started discussing that last year, just looking at cost and unnecessary costs that we are spending as a district, and what we can really do to eliminate some of those pieces while meeting the needs of students. And so I really appreciate seeing this in the 10-year facility plan, and really what those pieces really mean.
We threw away money on a garage, leasing a garage for a while. I think we've learned our lesson.
And so it's one of those things that's absolutely something that we're looking at and seeing what our options would be in that space. Another weakness was that 40% or more of the P&A findings were urgent or necessary, means they need to be completed within 1 to 5 years. So that's true. We had a lot of things that came up. The upside is many of those findings weren't necessarily a super high dollar cost, but they were a finding of something that we need to get out ahead of sooner as opposed to later. And then need good working environments was another potential vulnerability. So some questions. So there were 2 questions that kind of both asked about, for this plan, can we afford the plan, was kind of what the general question is. And what we took as a starting point is what our existing capital funds are. So everything with this plan would be able to fit within our current tax outlay, that we wouldn't make any changes to what our tax, how much of our tax goes to capital projects, that we want to stay in that 3 cents-ish range per dollar. And so when we get later where we're going to look kind of line by line, year by year, that's why we try to stay in that $5 to $6 million range for projects. As we get further out, we try to factor in inflation, so you'll see it goes up a little bit as we get further out in the future. But that's just because as we work through a 10-year plan, we know cost of goods is going to go up as we go year to year. Several questions about the tech schools. Do the tech school improvements allow for higher enrollment? And that is the intention. It's either us to be able to add programming or expand the capacity within spaces so we can enroll more students. So a lot of what we're looking at in those spaces is things that are directly tied to enrollment. There are a couple though that are identified as well where they're just spaces that need infrastructure updates, because again, both those buildings were built in the 1960s, and what the world looked like in 1960 in manufacturing and automotive, very different to what it looks like now in 2025. So there's some infrastructure upgrades that we would need to do as well. There was a question about the color coding on the physical needs assessment. So I think it was this chart over here. Your blue are your student occupied buildings. Your oranges are all your bus garages. Your green are your other buildings, but the learning center is hanging out in blue because it doesn't fit well in any bucket, because early childhood is there and VSP is there, but it's also a training facility. So it's living in other, but it gets a blue color because it's kind of both. So it didn't cleanly fit in one bucket. There's a question about the P&A costs. for North Tech seems to be higher than the other buildings. Why is it so different? If you compare North and South, they are a little bit closer. The challenge with South is it has more outbuildings. So the South number gets broken out, in firefighting South, horticulture South, auto and carpentry South. So if you pull those dollar amounts into the South line, it'll pull it out to get it closer to about 10 to $11 million. So there is still a difference. Also note that North Tech is our largest building in the district. Square footage wise, Jeff, how much bigger is North and South is?
So North Tech is about 375,000 square feet and South County Tech is about 265,000. So it's a little over 100,000.
So just when you think about roofs, that's a lot more roof. That's over North Tech. Can the board be notified of all the priority A findings? Yes, we can do that, and it's all part of the physical needs assessment, so we can incorporate that.
Kevin,
Yes.
I had asked that. I was wondering.
Yeah.
I find unless something is tracked, unless I see it when it's tracked.
Yep.
It doesn't exist.
Okay.
So I was wondering, could we get at least an update every couple of months, especially on especially the high priority side, just to make sure that they're done.
And so our plan is, with what you see with the draft tonight, we have identified what's happening in what year with the intention of giving you updates as we navigate through the year, how we are getting through this year's projects, what we have queued up for the next year, so you can kind of see those things get checked off the list as we move through. So that's absolutely something we can do. And then there was a couple questions about opportunities for grants. Have we looked into grants? And so we have looked into grant opportunities. There are some that exist for the career and technical education programming, more so than on the special education side. So that is something that we're looking to tap into as well to potentially offset some of our costs. This past year, we did the electrical trades remodel, and we were able to get about 50% of that cost of that project reimbursed by the state. Through a grant through DESI, and so that's something we look to do year over year wherever that's possible. The key is by having our projects pretty well ready to go, it's much easier to then shop them out for grants, because a lot of them have a very tight window of when you have to apply for the grant, when everything has to be completed, and when you submit the reimbursement. So like the electrical trades project, we found out in October that we got the grant, and we had to have everything expended by May. So it's a tight window to be able to work through some of these grants. But by having this intentional plan, we better position ourselves to be able to access grant funding. Question about generators. We do have generators in some buildings. This building has a generator. Learning Center has a generator.
Dinger has one for the storm shelter. We also have a storm shelter that they built at Litzinger about 7 to 8 years ago on a renovation. We have one at North County Tech that does our data center, and that's all we got currently.
Yeah. And then another question about the distribution centers. We kind of talked about distribution centers. That's a hot topic right there. Yeah.
And on my post that I wrote about grants, but I also asked about rebates.
Yes.
Do we have anybody monitoring rebates? I know utility companies will sometimes offer rebates.
Yeah, so we were using the Ameren incentive rebates for the lighting, but they just quit that this year as of January. So we no longer get that, but anytime we do HVAC renovations, we go out, as long as it's over 5 tons, we can get rebates back for Ameren for updating our HVAC. But yeah.
Good.
For that, yeah.
Glad we're doing that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anytime it can be somebody else's dollar, we'd like to be somebody else's dollar. So then some other insights. So one insight was that just priorities are not all urgent, which is, it was a great takeaway for us as well. There's a lot of things that we identified that are things that we have some runway on when we want to address the projects. North Tech is rated at 86.7% functionality, but estimated at 15.3 million in the physical needs assessment, so a lot higher than their schools. And so that was another takeaway. Both the tech schools, a lot of that came down to infrastructure, especially some of the electrical infrastructure and mechanical infrastructure in those spaces, because of the type of courses that we have in those buildings, where in other schools, they might not have rated as concerning as they did at the tech schools, where we need to do some upgrades in those spaces. And then a good question of, is it better to renovate an old building or get grants and build a new one? So we did build, Northview was a new building. That was a project that we did. It was a heavy lift to build a new building. And there were a lot of challenges with that, trying to thread the needle. Kind of as we get later, we talk about the plan of, with our existing resources, can we implement, can we execute? And those type of things would be a heavier lift than it is renovating the spaces that we have. So at this point, we're really focusing on renovations and upgrades of our existing footprint as opposed to building of new. That doesn't mean that that's not something we can consider further down the line, but where we're looking at over the next 10 years is really focused on our existing footprint is where we're at. All right. Don't think I missed anything. I did combine a couple. Did I miss anything that anybody had up there? Any questions?
Can you please speak to the plant?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I skipped that one. So the question was about plant maintenance. So plant maintenance is all about how easy is it to upkeep our spaces? So how do you keep them in good working order? We talked about how like sometimes you could install cheaper fixtures in a place, and then that impacts your plant maintainability because they don't have as long of a usable life. We have some spaces in the district where you may have been in a restroom that's a men's restroom that had plaster walls. That might be in one of our special education buildings, and thinking about how elementary school students use bathroom walls, it's not great to have a plaster wall as opposed to having a tile surface that's easier to wipe clean. So when you think about maintainability, what does that then create as a facilities cost where we have to then spend more on upkeep because the building materials that we chose on the outset of the project aren't conducive necessarily to the environment that we're using them in. So that's what plant maintenance is how much does it cost really year over year for us to maintain our footprint?
And that also plays into our roofs too. We went through COVID and they had shortages on roofing materials, so we missed out on a couple of years of having roofs done. That's another target.
Yeah. And as those things get older, then it becomes more expensive.
Yeah.
Or harder to do multiple of those projects at the same time. Mark, if you could pull slides back up. Jump through these really quick for those viewing at home. All right, so summary of some findings. So in addition to some of the things that you noted, overall, what we found was that all of our buildings are functioning quite well. Some of the issues that identified were already being addressed in the upcoming plan for FY25, FY26. So they were things that we knew were a problem. We already had them in the hopper lined up for the upcoming year. School site, structural, mechanical, electrical, and plant maintainability all scored lower across the district. And at the outset of the project, that's kind of what we expected, that we knew we'd put a lot of money in those other spaces. So these spaces weren't going to score as high. We had some dated specialty labs in the tech schools that pulled down our scores as well. Again, when you look back at electrical infrastructure, plumbing infrastructure, that we just know are things that are concerning about how we can move forward in those spaces. Overall, most of the priority projects were B and C priorities, so things that we need to do soon, but not things that we have to do right this minute. And then most of our projects are either mechanical, electrical, plumbing, or architectural projects. Again, we're not looking at big renovations. We're not looking at additions. We're really focusing on those things within our footprint. So now we're going to talk about the proposed plan. So it's a cascading 10-year plan, which outlines expenditures and projects for each year. If items come in below cost, projects in future years might be able to be moved up in the plan. We also might be able to add in, as I mentioned, those priority D projects. We might be able to move up sooner. So there's a little bit of elasticity with this plan. Also, as we navigate the plan, the intention is that every year we can add on a new year at the conclusion. So we can sunset the current year and then queue up for the board. Here's what's going to be the new year 10 of the plan as we work our way through.
The cascading 10-year facility planning consideration: 1, alignment with an annual budget. 2, scopes that work as listed below. Urgency, 3, and 4, logistical impact of implementation. This all comes down to, do we have the people to do the work and to minimize disruption? A lot of the work that you'll see on here has to be done, during summer. So that way it's least impacting on students.
Yeah, and that's the challenge. We can't do everything all over the district in 2 months. There's only so much you can do in June, July, and August. And so recognizing that we have that window, how do we stagger projects to be able to get everything done? All right, so now we're gonna kind of walk through what the plan is. So I'm gonna pass out handouts, resist the urge to take off the paper clip real quick. And we'll walk you through what you got. Okay. Everybody wants to jump ahead because it's exciting.
Just Thursday, the paper clips me, don't flip the page.
If you don't flip the pages, then you're okay. All right, so the page on top, this is our cover sheet that kind of gives you the at a glance. As I mentioned earlier, it goes all the way out through 2042. So you have listed there in that first set of columns, the type of building that it is. So our elementary schools are grouped together, our high schools are grouped together, our tech schools are grouped together, our other facilities and our bus garages. Then you have fiscal year by fiscal year, the anticipated costs within those spaces. Keep in mind, as we go out into the future, we did factor in a 3% inflation rate. And you'll notice that when we get to the next set of prints, is you might see in one column what the price is, and then further out it's higher. It's because we gave it in 2025 pricing, and then are forecasting out what it might cost when we get to the fiscal year where we're actually doing the project. So inflation is factored in throughout the plan. And so you see down there at the bottom in bold, and that highlighted yellow column for 25-26, we're looking at $5,687,000 would be what we would have in capital outlay for facilities projects for that year. And then you can kind of see that spread out over the plan. So in that 10-year window, with the exception of 35-36, pretty much everything is in that $5 to $6 million range as inflation climbs up a little bit. As you all touched on earlier about the distribution center, 35-36 jumps up a little bit because of some of those distribution center costs. If that building isn't part of the plan, then that would impact what we're spending in 35-36.
I would hope at 35-36 we have a building.
When is our lease up?
We have 2 years left on the lease after this year.
What's the buyout on that lease? Do you know?
There's not a buyout clause on that lease.
Who negotiated that lease?
I
I'm sure.
do not know the answer to that. I would have to look at the lease.
No.
Yes, we're on our 6th iteration of that lease, I believe.
Well, and remember, we looked at that lease a number of times just to see what our options are as in subleasing it, as in being able to. And so, the key now is being able to own a building, buy a building so that we can meet the needs and then being able to get rid of that cost that's going to really occur, as Kevin said, over the next couple of years. And that's really been the plan that we talked about last year. It's just about being able to find space, right, that can meet the needs. And so we have been slow playing that because it doesn't make sense to make it.
If I can get out of the lease.
Right.
Yep. All right, so any questions about that cover sheet before we move to the cascade?
You go into some more detail. I think you're gonna go into some more detail.
Yep. So then the next set, you got 4 pages stapled together. This is the 10-year cascading plan. So in the 10-year cascading plan, you have each building listed on the left-hand side on the far left. So like Ackerman's on the front page. And then underneath Ackerman, you have listed all of the different projects that are a part of the 10-year plan for Ackerman. You have in that cost column the 2025 costs, but as I mentioned, if it's further out in the plan, the dollar amount in red, that's the year in which the project's going to happen, and it shows you what we think it's going to cost in that year's dollars. So like with Ackerman, on the second line, the main student bathroom remodel set A, in 2025 pricing, we have that at $186,000. But when we get out to the 28-29 school year where we would do the project, we think it's going to be closer to $198,000 after inflation. So we wanted to incorporate that as a part of the plan, just because we know that is a reality within the economic climate.
And then when you look down through here, we tried to lump like some of the bathrooms at the schools together, because that will drive down the cost, and we can do them at the same time with the same contractor. So we strategically try to set certain projects up to work with one another.
And then Damien, can you speak to the color coding for the projects?
Yeah, so as we've talked about, there's a lot of different data points and being able to kind of take a glance and kind of understand what's happening in buildings was kind of the key here. So the green are really kind of repair upgrades. You can see there 88 for key sets. You can see handrail replacement. The purple are related mainly to toilet facilities. So you can, again, it was a priority we were setting to get those all updated. So we could quickly as a group look and see when those are happening and put those in. The orange are improvements. So those are program improvements, kitchen updates, those types of things are kind of a higher fiscal or dollar outline. And then the light gray are essentially the current fiscal year projects, those that are currently on the docket. The remainder really are comprised of roofs, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing projects are the rest of those items down there. But it gives you an ability to really kind of quickly just look at kind of the urgency. If you, for instance, go down to the tech buildings, you'll see more orange because there's more lab update programs there. Yeah, that was kind of the intention of that, just ease of legibility.
And then when you look at the roofs, you will see that they list sections and then a letter, just knowing that all of our buildings, the roofs are segmented out into sections, so we never replace the entire roof at one time. We replace the roofs in sections so we can spread the cost of that out over multiple years. And so we're always just repairing a section of roof as opposed to redoing an entire roof. Especially some of our buildings, a full roof would be a very expensive project, and then it would all hit end of life at the same time. So this way we can proactively be working our way around those roof projects.
And that's a very standard, very standard way to deal with roofs is to pace them out because an expenditure of $4 million on one roof, you're setting yourself up for that in the future, and that's just not a responsible thing. Sorry.
Kevin, have you looked at, you brought up roofs, it really infuriates me when I see a road being paved. And then a month later, it's being torn up for a plumbing problem or a sewer line problem. Have we looked at roofs and air conditioning units on roofs? And kind of coordinated, gee, if we're gonna replace this air conditioning unit, it's gonna need to have the roofing around it redone. Can we?
So a lot
coordinate some of those
on our
types of-
commercial roofs and HVAC units, they actually are set on a curve. So
Good.
it's,
So-
yeah, so you can pop those units right off and then put a new one right on, or they flash up to the
Yeah,
unit.
and
whenever
that's
they
just-
do 'em.
That's just one example. I'm
Yeah.
kind of thinking through all these projects of. If we're having to deal with a plumbing problem and it goes outside, and we have to excavate outside, are we looking at?
And that's
water-
where a lot of the sequencing of this went, was really
Exactly.
trying to look at being as minimally disruptive as possible. But if it's a space where we already have to tear up a part of the parking lot, then let's go ahead and do some other things while we're doing that
Right.
in that same footprint.
So-
Just like the new owner project that's gonna happen next year, like if we're moving those teachers out of these classroom spaces for right now, then let's address all of the things in that area. So for the next 30 years, no one has to leave that bank of classrooms because we've addressed everything in the space.
Right, and that's what I wanted to hear is that we're going in one time, taking care of everything we can foresee. Then moving on and not having to come back and readdress things constantly.
I'll give you a great example. The last project we did down at South County Tech, we renovated the electrical trades program, and we had to redo the hallway all the way down with new VCT floor tile, but that's one of the last sections we have remodeled down there. Well, we decided to rip up the main plumbing that runs all the way down the hallway, and because it's 60+ years old, so. You know,
Address
and
it
it
now.
was having several problems. Well, we ended up hitting a bunch of conduit, you know, and they had to get redone, but it was per the contractor, they had to, you know, fix all those issues. But anyway, we went ahead and was proactive and replaced all that plumbing line.
Otherwise, we would put a 30-year floor on top of what we know is a problem.
Yeah,
And then we'd have to rip the 30-year floor back up whenever the main eventually fails.
Yeah.
And so those are those projects with this plan that we want to have that intentionality of, we're not going to do something that's permanent on top of something that we know is a looming problem. And that's why the physical needs assessment was such an important part of this. So we had a full picture of all of the challenges and when things were reaching end of life.
And I've been with the district for over 18 years now,
So you
worked
know-
my way up in the system here, and you know, I've seen a lot of the stuff and kind of proactively know what to look for as we do these projects. You know, with the design team we have, it's been a pretty good team,
So
so
that's great to hear, because I see so many waste
me too,
things
yeah.
happen that it's
Yeah.
like.
And that's what I wanted to
tackle this
change.
first.
Okay, so the code, the color coding over here is based on the findings by category, correct?
Not necessarily, not,
Okay, so,
it's more, I know, it's a lot of different color coding. And we got, yeah, I apologize for that.
that's okay.
So this, on this document, the color coding here doesn't necessarily match the color coding up there. That
Sure.
the gray is the current, is the upcoming fiscal year.
Mhm.
Then the orange are things that are bigger projects. That we wanted to make sure we were aware of. The purple are bathrooms, and the reason why we highlighted the purple was it, in a lot of the space where we're looking at bathrooms, it's an ADA accessibility issue. And all of our buildings that were built in the sixties all have the same challenge. And so part of what we talked about is, can we design one bathroom and then that just be the SSD bathroom that kind of works its way around the district? So we're not designing 15 bathrooms, we're designing one bathroom, and that's what a bathroom looks like, that we know meets all of the needs of all of the student and community populations that we serve. And so that's why that was kind of called out, is because everywhere we went, we knew that was a problem.
And a major complaint from the building principals too, is the bathrooms, especially at our special schools.
And then the greens are more just small upgrades or replacements, like with Ackerman, it's the lock sets and the keys, because we know we've got some standard door handles. And for ADA accessibility, you don't want a door knob, you want it to be a handle with a lever. And so replacing those pieces out.
I guess my question is the priorities, like priority A, priority B, are those lining up with the years out? So all of our priority A are getting done this fiscal.
In the upcoming fiscal year or 1 year out.
Okay, and then all of the priority B are getting done within that 5-year period.
As much as we possibly could in that window. There's a few things that are like 5+.
Yeah, and you try to also, with student impact, we try to also incorporate a project and maybe a tech school to build the program. So, you know, we're trying to implement the electrical needs of the schools, but also possibly do a renovation project as well, a smaller one.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious about just how some of these things are kind of planned. If you could speak to, I'm looking at for example, the 38-39 academic year.
Mhm.
Where it's a big bump up to $12 million in expenses. Obviously, that is a while from now. And so for example, if we look at the automotive building.
Mhm.
I just want to make sure I understand. So in the leftmost column, item 3, under the automotive building says, auto shop renovation, $2.6 million.
Mhm.
And it's quoted orange.
Yeah.
Does that mean that if I read this correctly, it's being now, or else maybe we'll do that in 38-39, and at that time it should cost about $3.8 million for that one? Okay.
Mhm.
And just kind of curious about the grouping, because there's a bunch of things that need to be done at Northview that, could be done at Northview around that same year, and why that's all grouped in 1 year, as opposed to spread out. How did you guys kind of decide to think through that?
So some of the grouping of projects was that if we're going to disrupt an area, then we may as well do a lot of things in that space at one time. If you talk to a building principal, like construction is a headache as a building principal, and they'd rather not have their building be under construction. But if they are, they want that, like, rip the Band-Aid off if possible, so we can just get all of this stuff out. But if I have to move one person around this year, then one person next year, let's just kind of get it all out of the way if possible. So for projects where we could do that, where we could disrupt a space all at the same time once, but then they get a reprieve from construction, we want to give that to our schools as much as possible. So there was that piece. The tech schools, it's a little bit different because some of these projects, because the nature of our shops, it's not necessarily going to impact anybody around them. They're not going to feel the impact the same way as what you might see at a Northview or an Ackerman.
And
those types of
the
buildings.
request here is, this would affect the automotive, but they're relocating, so they're gonna have to take over and swap with the carpentry shop, so they're gonna switch spaces, so we have to renovate both spaces at the same time. So we can't just do one or the other. If we were to do one, then it's gonna displace another teacher and students. So that's why you see those grouped together and the price tag higher.
And I'm sure you guys have already thought about this, but when you talk about a standard bathroom, I'm hoping that you gave the example of elementary kids and not wanting plaster, that they're all kind of the same materials. and so forth, which then also, I would assume, the cleaning, the types of materials we have to order from supply wise to make sure we're maintaining that, whether we have paper towels or how we're doing drying in those spaces. All that can be consistent throughout the district eventually.
Standardizing is very important.
Exactly, and
That's something we worked really hard on, is trying to create a standardization throughout the district regarding finishes or how we approach spaces. So no matter what school you go to, there's gonna be a similar type of restroom, like we kind of have a standardized what works well for the district from a maintenance perspective, longevity, cleanability. So when you go to the different schools, you know, we might have to work in a different existing space to remodel, but at least we're trying to give the same type of application to all the schools. So that's kind of been what we've been working with.
Like the bus awnings are a good example, that if you walk to the front of 3 or 4 buildings, it's the same awning.
yeah.
It's same design, it's longer, but it's the
Yeah,
same.
Terrazzo floors, it's the same
Yep.
Yeah.
stripping material, the same finish material, everything is standardized throughout.
Yep.
So we're not having to go here and do this and go over here and do that.
Do we carry insurance on the roofs? I just,
Yeah, I do not know the answer to that question. I'd have to get back to you on
the
that.
reason why is, most insurances are. I mean, we just had, we live in the Midwest,
Right.
we had a hailstorm. We ended up having to we have to get a new roof and, new sidings, it all got
Yeah,
shredded.
so just confirmed it is part of our property insurance.
Okay, and so will that, Harry, I mean. Hopefully that, you know, the insurance will end up paying for your home. That you're in.
I mean, it really depends on though if there is damage that we can attribute. With a commercial roof, it's a little bit different,
Okay,
but of what it can withstand.
do we have people coming out and checking, I mean.
Yeah, we have our roofing consultants that would come out if need be. With these last hailstorms we only had one piece of flashing come off at North County Tech, but we didn't have any other signs of damage.
South Tech didn't get hit?
No, luckily we did, yeah.
Yeah. 56,000, we got hit with 56,000.
Yeah, Dr.
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 Cooney,
Macklin called me and said, hey, do we have any issues in any of our buildings?
Dr. Cooney was thinking about his personal home. So-
Yeah.
Right, so that's where we're going back and forth. So it's a little bit different, right?
Yeah,
That's
so
just only replace the roofs.
I have a lot of questions, well, not a lot, but a couple of questions about the bathrooms. Like this stands out to me as like, how is this impacting students now?
Mhm.
Do these buildings have bathrooms within these buildings that do meet the
They do.
ADA requirements? Okay, so it's not like right now we are operating with no bathroom in that
No,
building that
correct.
is.
But it's how do we make it so that every space that's in a building is accessible to
Yes.
all of our students?
Okay, perfect.
Is
Well,
what-
I was concerned at how far out that
Yeah.
those were, so that's why I wanted to clarify, are we having buildings where there are no bathrooms there
Yeah.
that meet the ADA requirements, because that would be a concern.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just want to make note that in 2038 and 2039, the boardroom also is on the list
It
of
is.
STEM models, so keep running. We all want to be able to see
I think that's also where central office carpet is out there.
it. And then a question, so you mentioned that, you know, if we're addressing something and another item on the list comes up and it's reasonable to do it, how much wiggle room do you have built in these budgets for that kind of thing? Do you have a buffer? Or would you have to move things
So
down?
so as we talked about, there's contingency built into projects. So there's the hope that things come in under budget. But what's not in here that's separate from this is our standard operating budget we have for facilities for what we consider more like our summer projects. You know, paint this classroom over here, replace some ceiling tile, or the things where things
Lighting
just happen,
upgrades.
lighting upgrades, or where things, it was fine, but now it's not fine, that something happened in a classroom space and now we need to replace the ceiling tile. Because it would happen in that space that we would then go behind and do that. So we have a budget for those types of projects. But there is not a large contingency for like a $200,000 project that might come up. At the same time, we do know that emergencies may happen. So we do, in addition to how we talk about the district has a fund balance, you have the fund balance that covers operating costs. We also carry a fund balance for our capital projects as well. So if we had something happen that was a act of God or some other piece where we needed to make quick action, large improvements, we have some funds that we can tap into for those types of projects.
Then a follow-up question to that. So we're looking at the cost per year. Are you looking at, are these based on new money that comes in every single year, or is this a spending down of the capital
Yeah.
funds?
So it's not a spending down, it's just a carrying forward of if we're at a 3 cents a year, what we bring in our tax levy, if we continue to do 3 cents a year towards 16 funds, towards capital projects, that's how we would fund this moving forward. So it would be money that we're collecting year over year. So we're anticipating that we're staying about flat. We're not, I know Cindy has other projections that talk about how we think we may grow and where we might go. We're in this space being very conservative of thinking that what we have will remain flat, knowing that if there is growth, that's great, but we wanted to have a plan that's sustainable over the life of the 10 years.
I just want to say this is a very thoughtful plan. I appreciate being able to hear this. Yeah. Thank you.
So, any other questions about these documents? Good job. All right, so just a couple loose ends. We're going to talk a little bit about FY 26 in a little bit more detail, just because it's on the immediate horizon.
So for FY 25, 26 fiscal school year, you will see slide, we've kind of already talked about most of this, but on the slide, the next one, we'll be focusing on roof replacements, asphalt repair, repairing stormwater drainage issues. The next one.
Yeah.
General updates, the classroom space, some asbestos abatement, and a complete hallway renovation over at New Owner.
So for next year, new owner is really the one large project that we have. Everything else really falls into that preventative maintenance category that we talked about. And again, a lot of this stuff carries over to things that we found in the physical needs assessment that we knew were issues.
This is just a silly question, probably, but the fiscal year starts July 1st. So are you, so
the new owner project is split.
Yeah.
The demolition and new owner is going to follow. What's nice about a lot of our projects is most of the demo happens in May and June. And the demo is the lower cost part of the project. The higher cost part of the project is the install of the new pieces coming in. So a lot of these projects straddle fiscal years.
Makes it very hard.
because that's when most of the work gets done.
Yes, it is.
Fiscal year changes.
And we pray for no rain.
Yeah,
In June
yes.
is what we do. Because that can move a roof from one fiscal year to the next fiscal year if we have a rainy June. So the two items to be determined, we already talked about the distribution center already. But that's an item that we need to continue to sort out. The other piece is South Bus Garage. Remember when we did the transportation update, we talked about how we still have a few contracted out transportation providers. Melville and Kirkwood are currently, we're contracting with them to transport our students. South Bus Garage's campus just doesn't have room for any additional buses. And so if we're going to continue with contracting out, then that would work. But if we ever wanted to bring those back in-house, we would need to look at potentially somewhere with a larger footprint for South Bus Garage to house those additional buses. Also, by relocating South Bus Garage, it does free up some potential space to add additional technical programming at South Tech. So there's an instructional benefit to that as well. We've done some preliminary looking in the footprint that we'd be looking at for a South Bus Garage. Currently, commercial offerings are pretty limited. There's not a lot of open acreage. But we are continuing to look and see what might be viable for that space. So that's another piece that we're thinking about, because that long-term goal of trying to get all of our transportation underneath the SSD umbrella, we would need to have somewhere to park those buses if we chose to do that. So next steps. So we're going to incorporate items to be determined into the plan that I just talked about, distribution center and South Bus Garage. We're going to finalize the numbers and estimates on here. Again, this is kind of a living draft at this point that we've been working through. We're going to make some updates and some of the things is just cleaning up some of the color coding, kind of the layout of this document to make it a little more navigable. So revise this based on your feedback this evening with the intention to then submit this plan for board approval either later this month or at the May meeting for board approval is what our plan is moving forward. Anything we left out or any additional questions? Pretty thorough.
Questions or comments?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this was really helpful. Lots of progress. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Yeah, motion here, no, sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right, and, work study adjourned.
No.